Welcome to Heartline Stories. Today we bring you a tale filled with shocking twists and jaw-dropping moments. In a mansion of unimaginable wealth, a cruel millionaire's wife humiliates a hard-working cleaning lady. But just when you think the story is clear, the unexpected changes everything. Secrets bubble to the surface, alliances shift, and hearts are tested in ways no one saw coming. Where will the truth lead? Stay tuned to find out, and let us know where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Heartline Stories for more unforgettable tales. Sophia Green wiped the sweat off her forehead as she carried the mop and bucket into the grand living room of the Harrison mansion. Sophia was a cleaning lady, and her job was to keep the enormous house sparkling clean. She didn't mind the hard work. It kept her busy, and she loved taking care of her younger brother, Michael, back at their tiny apartment. One afternoon, as Sophia polished the golden staircase, Lauren Harrison, the millionaire's wife, walked in. Lauren's high heels clicked loudly on the marble floor. She had a sharp nose, cold eyes, and wore a shimmering green dress that seemed more expensive than anything Sophia could dream of owning. Lauren stopped in her tracks and looked at Sophia with disgust. "Sophia, you missed a spot. Honestly, do you even know how to clean properly?" she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Sophia smiled politely and said, "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'll fix it right away." Lauren rolled her eyes and laughed loudly. "Fix it? You couldn't even polish a silver spoon properly, let alone clean my mansion. Ugh, why do we even hire people like you?" Her cruel words echoed in the empty hall. Sophia's face turned red, but she kept her head down. She didn't want to lose her job. She needed it for Michael. Just as Lauren turned to leave, a young man walked into the room. It was Ryan Harrison, Lauren's stepson. Ryan had always been kind to Sophia, but today he looked serious. "What's going on here, Lauren?" Ryan asked, his voice firm. "Oh, nothing," Lauren said, flipping her hair. "I was just teaching Sophia how to do her job properly." Ryan frowned and glanced at Sophia, who was still scrubbing the stairs. He seemed to sense something wasn't right. But before Ryan could say more, the front door opened, and someone stepped inside the mansion. It was an older woman, dressed simply but elegantly. She carried herself with grace, and her kind smile seemed to light up the room. Sophia turned to look, her eyes widening in shock. Sophia could hardly believe her eyes as she stared at the older woman standing in the doorway. The visitor had an air of elegance, but her warmth was the most striking thing about her. Lauren, however, seemed less impressed. Her expression turned sour as she crossed her arms tightly. "Well, well, Mother Harrison," Lauren said with a forced smile. "What brings you here?" The older woman, Margaret Harrison, gently placed her handbag on a nearby chair and looked around the room. Her eyes settled on Sophia, who was still clutching her mop. Margaret's gaze softened. "I've come to see my family," Margaret replied calmly, "and perhaps to see how the staff are being treated." Lauren's forced smile faltered, but she quickly regained her composure. "The staff? Oh, they're just fine. Everything is perfect. Right, Sophia?" Lauren turned to Sophia, narrowing her eyes. Sophia hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to say. She nodded nervously and said, "Yes, ma'am. Everything is fine." Margaret stepped closer to Sophia, her kind eyes searching her face. "Sophia, is it?" she asked gently. "How long have you been working here?" "About a year, ma'am," Sophia replied quietly. Margaret smiled. "Thank you for keeping this house so beautiful. I hope you're being treated well." Lauren interrupted with a fake laugh. Oh, she's treated just fine. Isn't that right, Sophia? She said with a sharp look. Sophia didn't answer, but Margaret noticed the hesitation. She glanced at Ryan, who seemed uneasy, then turned her attention back to Lauren. Lauren, I hope you're treating Sophia with respect. Hard work deserves appreciation, don't you think? Margaret said firmly. Lauren waved her hand dismissively. Of course, of course. She's a cleaning lady. It's her job. Margaret's expression didn't change, but there was a spark of something in her eyes. Determination. Well, I believe everyone deserves kindness, no matter their role. Ryan spoke up, his voice steady. I agree with Grandma. Sophia works harder than most people I know. Lauren raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. Margaret walked over to Sophia and said, Sophia, would you like to join us for lunch? I'd love to hear about your life. Sophia's eyes widened. She wasn't sure if she had heard correctly. Lunch? With the Harrisons? Lauren stiffened. Lunch? With the cleaning lady? Mother, that's… Margaret raised her hand to stop her. Lauren, it's my house too, and I'll invite whoever I like. Sophia felt her heart racing. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but something told her this lunch might change everything. Sophia hesitated, her hands trembling slightly as she put down her mop. Was this really happening? Margaret's invitation felt like a dream, but the stern glare from Lauren reminded her it could easily turn into a nightmare. Come, my dear, Margaret said warmly, leading the way to the grand dining room. Sophia followed quietly, her heart pounding. Ryan walked beside her and gave her a reassuring smile, while Lauren trailed behind, muttering under her breath. The dining room was magnificent. A massive crystal chandelier hung above a long, polished wooden table set with fine china and gleaming silverware. The aroma of roasted chicken and freshly baked bread filled the air. Margaret gestured to a seat near her. Sit here, Sophia, she said, ignoring the stunned expression on Lauren's face. Sophia hesitated. Ma'am, I don't think… Nonsense, Margaret interrupted gently but firmly. You're my guest today. Sophia sat down, her hands resting awkwardly in her lap. Lauren plopped into her usual chair with a dramatic huff. Well, this is highly unusual, she muttered under her breath. Margaret ignored her and began serving Sophia herself. Tell me, Sophia, do you have family? She asked as she placed a serving of chicken on Sophia's plate. Yes, ma'am, Sophia said softly. I have a younger brother, Michael. He's in school. I take care of him. Margaret's eyes softened. That's admirable. You must be very proud of him. Sophia smiled for the first time since the conversation began. I am. He's a smart boy. Ryan chimed in, leaning forward. Michael sounds great. What's he studying? Before Sophia could answer, Lauren slammed her fork onto the table. Enough, she snapped. I don't understand why we're entertaining the cleaning lady at our family table. What will people say if they find out? Margaret turned to Lauren with a calm but firm expression. What people say is not my concern, Lauren. What matters to me is kindness and respect. Lauren opened her mouth to respond, but Ryan cut her off. Grandma's right. If anything, people should admire her for treating everyone equally. Sophia looked down, trying to hold back tears. She wasn't used to this kind of kindness, especially in this house. Just then there was a sudden knock at the door. One of the other staff members opened it, and a man stepped inside. He was tall, with dark hair and sharp eyes. He carried a briefcase and wore a stern expression. I'm looking for Mrs. Margaret Harrison, the man said in a deep voice. Margaret stood up. I'm Margaret Harrison, And you are? The man walked closer, his gaze sweeping over the room. My name is Mr. Carter. I'm here on behalf of the Harrison Family Trust. I believe there are some matters we need to address. Lauren's face went pale and Ryan glanced at Margaret in confusion. Even Sophia couldn't help but feel curious. Who was this man, and what did he want? Lauren's already pale face turned even whiter as she looked at Mr. Carter. Her knuckles tightened around her fork, and a bead of sweat formed on her forehead. Margaret, however, remained calm and composed. Mr. Carter, you mentioned the family trust. What business brings you here today? She asked, her voice steady but curious. Mr. Carter adjusted his tie and opened his briefcase. He pulled out a stack of documents and placed them on the table. Mrs. Harrison, I'm here to discuss some unusual financial activities regarding the trust. It seems there have been irregularities. Everyone in the room froze. Ryan leaned forward, his brow furrowed. Irregularities? What does that mean? Mr. Carter glanced at Lauren for a brief moment before returning his gaze to Margaret. There are significant withdrawals that have not been accounted for, and they raise serious questions. I need to go over these matters with the family. Margaret's expression grew serious. Very well, Mr. Carter. Let us address this together. But first, I'd like to know, do these irregularities implicate someone specific? Mr. Carter hesitated before replying. It is premature to make accusations, but there is a pattern that points to someone with access to the trust. Lauren suddenly stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is ridiculous, she snapped, her voice shaky. I don't have time for baseless accusations. If you'll excuse me, I have important matters to attend to. Margaret raised a calm hand. Sit down, Lauren. If there's an issue with the trust, it's our duty to address it. Lauren hesitated but reluctantly sat back down, glaring at Mr. Carter. Sophia, on the other hand, remained silent, feeling out of place but deeply curious about what was unfolding. Mr. Carter opened the stack of papers and began flipping through them. The concerning activity started about 2 months ago. Significant sums were withdrawn without any explanation, and the money has not been accounted for since. Ryan frowned. That's strange. Who has access to the trust funds? Primarily the immediate family, Mr. Carter replied, and unfortunately, the withdrawals were made under your family's authorization. Margaret's face darkened. I want a full investigation into this, Mr. Carter. Every detail must be uncovered. Mr. Carter nodded. Of course, Mrs. Harrison, but there's something else. He paused, pulling out a final piece of paper. The most recent withdrawal was flagged because it came with an unusual request, a transfer directly to an offshore account. Lauren's hand shot up to cover her mouth as her eyes darted nervously between Margaret and Mr. Carter. Ryan noticed her unease and asked, Lauren, do you know anything about this? Lauren stammered, Why would I? Are you accusing me? No one is accusing anyone, yet, Margaret said firmly. But we need transparency here. Mr. Carter, can you trace the account? Yes, Mrs. Harrison, Mr. Carter said, but it may take time. I'll need access to the family's personal records. While all this was happening, Sophia observed quietly, wondering how such a powerful family could be entangled in something so serious. And why did Lauren look so guilty? Before Margaret could respond to Mr. Carter, a loud crash echoed from another room. Everyone turned toward the sound, alarmed. What was that? Ryan asked, standing up. Margaret frowned. I don't know. Let's find out. Everyone hurried toward the source of the loud crash, their footsteps echoing through the enormous house. Sophia followed hesitantly, gripping the edge of her apron. As they turned a corner, they saw the grand glass cabinet in the sitting room shattered into pieces, its priceless contents scattered on the floor. Standing in the middle of the wreckage was a young housemaid, trembling and pale. Her hands were raised in panic, and her lips quivered as she tried to explain. I, I didn't mean to. The vase was so heavy. I lost my grip. Lauren's anger boiled over immediately. You clumsy fool, she shouted, storming toward the maid. Do you have any idea how much those artifacts are worth? How dare you destroy my belongings? The young maid burst into tears, shaking her head helplessly. I'm so sorry, ma'am. It was an accident. I didn't mean to break anything. Margaret, who had been silently observing, stepped forward with her usual calm demeanor. Lauren, that's enough, she said, her voice firm but kind. Yelling won't fix what's been broken. Lauren spun around to face her. Enough? Do you even realize how expensive these things are, Mother Harrison? Someone has to be held accountable for this. Ryan crouched down and carefully picked up a piece of the shattered vase. It's just a thing, Lauren, he said. Accidents happen. What's more important is making sure everyone's okay. The young maid sniffled and nodded gratefully, but Lauren wasn't convinced. Of course you'd take her side, Ryan. You and your grandmother are always defending the staff as if they're family. Margaret gave Lauren a measured look. Perhaps because they deserve to be treated with dignity, just like anyone else, she replied. And Lauren, I think you're upset about more than just a broken vase. Care to explain what's really bothering you? Lauren froze, her eyes narrowing. What's that supposed to mean? But before Margaret could elaborate, Mr. Carter entered the room, holding his papers tightly. Mrs. Harrison, he said, addressing Margaret, I just received word from my office. We've traced the offshore account involved in the suspicious transactions. The tension in the room shifted immediately. Everyone, including Lauren, turned to Mr. Carter. And, Margaret prompted, her voice steady. Mr. Carter cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. The account belongs to someone within the family. The name registered with the account is Lauren Harrison. The room fell silent. Lauren's face turned crimson and her eyes darted around nervously. That's impossible, she stammered. There must be some mistake. Margaret raised an eyebrow. Is there? Sophia, standing quietly in the corner, couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. Lauren's demeanor suggested she was hiding something, but Sophia didn't dare to speak up. She watched as Margaret's expression remained calm, though her piercing eyes didn't miss a thing. Ryan crossed his arms, his voice low but sharp. Lauren, if there's nothing to hide, why are you so defensive? Lauren opened her mouth to protest, but before she could speak, another knock came at the door, this one louder and more urgent than the first. Everyone turned toward the sound, their nerves on edge. Margaret gestured for one of the staff members to open the door. When it swung open, a tall, unfamiliar man stepped inside. He wore a crisp suit and carried a leather briefcase. I'm Agent Collins, the man announced, flashing a badge. I'm with the Federal Financial Investigations Bureau. We've been monitoring the offshore account linked to this residence, and I'm afraid this matter is now under federal investigation. Agent Collins' words sent a wave of shock through the room. Lauren's face turned pale and she clutched the edge of the table as if trying to steady herself. Margaret took a deep breath and faced the agent. Agent Collins, you're welcome to proceed with your investigation. The Harrison family has nothing to hide. Lauren suddenly stood up, her voice trembling. This is absurd. I don't know anything about that account. You can't pin this on me. Agent Collins raised an eyebrow and calmly opened his briefcase. He pulled out a folder and laid it on the table. We have evidence linking the withdrawals directly to you, Mrs. Lauren Harrison. The documents showed transactions made using your personal identification. Lauren's hands began to shake and she backed away. I don't know how that happened. Someone must have stolen my information. Ryan stepped forward, his expression a mix of disappointment and disbelief. Lauren, stop. If you're innocent, we'll figure this out, but lying won't help. Tears welled up in Lauren's eyes and she looked around the room desperately. Her gaze landed on Sophia, and for a moment her expression shifted to something cold and calculating. It's her! Lauren suddenly shouted, pointing at Sophia. She must have done it. She's been sneaking around this house for months. Sophia froze, her eyes wide with fear. What? No, I didn't. Margaret immediately stood up, her voice firm. Lauren, stop this nonsense. Blaming Sophia won't erase the evidence against you. It only makes you look guiltier. Agent Collins nodded. Mrs. Harrison, this isn't the time for baseless accusations. We've already verified the source of the transactions. Lauren broke down, covering her face with her hands. Fine, I admit it. I made the transfers, but I had no choice. Those were my funds, my future. I deserve more than this. The room fell silent except for Lauren's sobs. Margaret's face was calm but filled with disappointment. Lauren, this is not how we treat family, or anyone else. You've hurt more than just yourself with your actions. Agent Collins stepped forward. Mrs. Lauren Harrison, you'll need to come with us for further questioning. Please gather your things. As Lauren was escorted out, the tension in the room began to dissolve. Margaret turned to Sophia and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Sophia, I'm sorry for what you've endured here. You deserve better. Sophia smiled weakly, grateful for Margaret's kindness. Ryan chimed in. Sophia, if you ever need help with anything, let me know. We owe you that much. Margaret looked at Sophia with a warm smile. And if you're willing, I'd love for you to stay on. You're not just a cleaning lady to us, Sophia. You're part of this household. Sophia's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of gratitude. She nodded, feeling for the first time like she truly belonged somewhere.